Great. Everybody seated? Everybody got some food in their tummies? Y'all good? Cool. Welcome to Salesforce. My name is Gino Ramos. I am an Equality Programs Manager in our Office of Equality that just started a few months ago. And I just would like to welcome you to Salesforce since we'll be hosting you all for the Asia Society event. Wanted to give you guys a little sneak peek into what we're doing in regards to the communities that we're serving, especially with the Asian Pacific Islander community for this month. At Salesforce, the higher purpose for us is to drive equality. Not only are we providing great CRM products and tools in terms of technology, but we're also trying to drive towards this age of equality. Within Salesforce, there's actually 4 pillars for the age of equality that we're really striving to deal with. One being equal rights. You've probably seen a lot of the stuff around what our CEO, Mark Benioff, has been stating in regards to different legislation that's gone around the world, especially here in the US. And we want to make sure that we are really making it a safe place for our employees to work at. And hopefully we can bring the community along to help us make sure that any sort of discriminative action is going to be taken care of with what we can handle in the workplace. Equal pay is also one of our large initiatives here at Salesforce. You've probably heard about our Equal Pay Initiative, where last year we invested $3 million to ensure that the gender pay gap was closed here at Salesforce. We're still working on it. We're not perfect. We also invested another $3 million this past year to ensure that our employees are being able to get the fair pay that they deserve for the work that they do. Equal education, one of the big components that we take care of with our .org component of the company. We have about 45 schools that we have adopted, as well as contributed about $20 million to those schools to make sure education is well off and good to go. And then equal opportunity, which I'll mention here, which touches a little bit on the host employee resource group here at Salesforce hosting this event for you. In terms of our vision, just so you know, diversity, inclusion, community impact, and change are large pieces of what we want to do. And having you here as the Asia Society is part of that community impact charter that we're trying to make happen. So having you involved and being involved with you is something that we really take dear to heart with Office of Equality. And last but not least, just would like to introduce to you, not only is Pacific Force one of our employee resource groups at the company that we harness to get diverse opinions and inclusion happening here at Salesforce, but we have actually 7 other employee resource groups in the company, ranging from an LGBT group to a women's group to sustainability to the South Asian Pacific Islander heritage, as well as vets, abilities of people with different disabilities, and Latino Force as our other employee resource groups. Again, we really are happy that you all are here, and I hope you have a great panel discussion today. And if you have any questions about how we are doing with our equality charter, hopefully we'll be able to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to us at the Office of Equality, but hope you have a great session, and thank you for coming. Ken, there you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Ken Wilcox. I'm co-chair of the Asia Society. My other half is Jack Wadsworth, sitting over there. Thank you, Jack. So tonight is the most important night of the year for the Asia Society. It's our annual dinner. Tonight we'll be honoring several people in the area of philanthropy. Every year for our Asia Society annual dinner, we have a different theme. This year it's philanthropy, and other years it's been topics like education or art or business or innovation. This year, philanthropy. And we like to take our basic theme, pull it out of the annual dinner, and hold a symposium on the same day as the annual dinner, midday. This is where we are right now. Thank you for coming. This gives us an opportunity to dig a little deeper into the theme without distracting the attention from the honorees tonight. So today at the symposium, the theme tonight, focus on the honorees themselves. I want to say that I think this topic is a particularly important one. I view it personally as a very important topic. I can tell you when I was only about that tall, my parents every week forced me to donate to the church, as it were. When I got to be a little bit bigger, it was my older brother who literally would grab my arm, pull it around behind me, and twist it until I gave forth. Not that much later, I got married, and for 35 years now, my wife has been forcing me to give generously. Now that I'm finally retired, I can honestly say all of this has had an influence on my life. I now do these things voluntarily. And for the past 2 years now, I've been devoting my life personally to a handful of charitable organizations or eleemosynary activities that I personally consider very, very important. And some of them are represented here today. One of the main ones, of course, is the Asia Society itself. And I'm going to mention the Asian Art Museum in a minute as yet another one of my focuses, because we do have Akiko Yamazaki here today, who is the chair of the Asia Society. And when Jack's of the Asian Art Museum, I get these two confused because when Jack's not telling me what to do, Akiko is. I also want to take 1 minute to be sure to thank Salesforce for their generosity today. We're very happy to be here. We greatly value our relationship with Salesforce. Thank you very, very much. So my purpose with this introduction is just to make sure that you have all the names firmly in mind. I'd like to start by mentioning our honorees, who are most all here today. We have Tim Draper, and Tim, is Bill here as well? Yeah. Okay, good. Great, great, great. These are, in case you don't know, I believe that Akiko will be giving you in-depth introductions, but Bill and Tim are world-famous venture capitalists who have been very, very active in the philanthropic front. We also have Richard Blum sitting right here in front of me, and there are so many things that could be said about him that I'm not even going to try. I'm going to leave it totally to Akiko. And then we've got, of course, Jack Wadsworth, who's very active on the philanthropic front as well. I also want to welcome our panelists today, Akiko Yamazaki, again, and this time I'll say it right, the chairman of the Asia Society. Oh, excuse me, I did it wrong again. Oh my God, chairman of the Asian Art Museum. My problem is that when I'm not here, I'm there, so it's a little confusing. And also one of our honorees in the past for her excellence and contributions to contemporary Asian art. We also have Dr. Emmett Carson, who's the founding CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And we have Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan here with us, who will be also on the panel, who's a professor of public policy at the University of California at Riverside, and also on the board of directors of the California Endowment. And finally, just one word about the, I'll say, Asia Society, which is devoted to increasing the understanding of Americans about Asia, as well as increasing the understanding of Asians about America. I think that's an extremely important mission, and I hope that even today, this forum, in one way or another, serves that end. So with that, I want to turn it over to Akiko. Akiko will be giving, not only will she be coordinating the efforts of the panel, but she'll also be giving a keynote speech. Yes, yes. And I probably shouldn't draw attention to Jay Xu, the head of the Asian Art Museum, who just walked into the room. So here we go, Akiko.
Thank you, Ken and Asia Society, for having me here today. Can everybody hear me? Jay, apparently I've been promoted to the chairman of the Asia Society, so you'll have to find a new chairman for the museum now. um, our panelists today are legends in their own rights, in their business and philanthropic work, and I'm truly humbled and honored to be in their company today. But before I introduce our distinguished panel, please allow me to say a few words about my own experiences. My current work around philanthropy has the triple A theme: animals, art, and Asia. I also have a simple but powerful quote that serves as my guiding principle. I discovered this quote a few years ago at no other than the Bronx Zoo while I was visiting with my two children. It goes like this: if you cannot see it, you cannot know it. If you cannot know it, you cannot understand it. If you cannot understand it, you cannot love it. Let me start with the animals. The two historic elephant population crises have been linked directly to the rise in the Japanese economy in the late 80s and the most recent rise of the Chinese economy. You may have heard about the Wildlife Conservation Society's 98 Elephants campaign. It has been estimated that a staggering 110,000 elephants have been killed in the recent 3 years' time, translating roughly to 98 elephants a day. That's one killed every 15 minutes. This elephant genocide is driven by the demand for ivory as a symbol for wealth and prestige in Asia. Sophisticated criminal elements are often the same groups that smuggle guns, people, and drugs, orchestrate the poaching and smuggling of elephant tusks to foreign markets. The illicit profits of this ivory trade finance terrorism and wars. Therefore, not only the future of elephants is endangered, but also security in Africa and the rest of the world. Given the magnitude of this crisis, many conservation organizations have responded collectively and created momentum behind powerful campaigns such as WCS's 98 Elephants. The organization that I co-founded 15 years ago with a friend, Wildlife Conservation Network, launched the Elephant Crisis Fund in 2015 and has already raised over $10 million in the last 3 years. Our original goal was $5 million, so there has been a lot of support behind this effort. We are on track to raise $15 million this year, far exceeding our original goal. The money has gone to support over 80 organizations on the ground in Africa on a campaign to stop the demand, stop the trafficking, stop the killing. If you went to Beijing in the last few years, you may have seen large billboards with Yao Ming or the actress Li Bingbing next to the Stop the Demand slogans. At home in the US, we have been fortunate to have the likes of the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation to be major supporters behind this effort. Star power, as you know, can make a big difference. These collective efforts have led to real results. While slow, we are starting to see some recovery in pockets of elephant populations. But perhaps the most significant and symbolic and powerful result has been the joint declaration by President Obama and President Xi Jinping in 2016, banning the trade of ivory in both the US and China. Now let me talk about art next. I currently have the honor of serving as the chairman of the board of the Asian Art Museum, not Asia Society. I have been on its board now for almost 20 years. I want to thank Asia Society for honoring me in the Asian Art Museum with the Excellence in Leadership in Contemporary Art Award in 2015. The Asian Art Museum just celebrated its 50th anniversary last year in 2016. It was founded around the generous gift of the collection of Chicago industrialist Avery Brundage. He chose the city of San Francisco as the home for his amazing collection, with the goal that it would serve as a bridge for understanding. The region in the world we call Asia today is the home for 60% of the world's population. It is comprised of many cultures, which with diverse languages, unique histories, and belief systems. So the Asian Art Museum has a really tall order to be a bridge for understanding. We need to be a very large bridge. And we're just doing that. We have been making the bridge larger and larger in the last 50 years. As you may know, the museum started at the Golden Gate Park as a wing of the Young without its separate entrance. Space was so limited that when we mounted special exhibitions, part of the permanent collection had to come down. Almost 15 years ago, we moved to our current building in Civic Center in front of the City Hall of San Francisco, a prime location. It is one of the few standalone museums in the Western world dedicated to Asian art. Many of you in the room today, including our panelists and honoree Dick Blum and his wife, Senator Feinstein, played an important role in bringing the museum to its current location. The official name of the Asian Art Museum is Chongmun Lee Center for Asian Art and Culture. Of course, Mr. Lee is one of the honorees tonight and has always played a very important role in both Asia Society and the Asian Art Museum. And Jack, of course, who is one of my panelists, has been our champion for contemporary art. And I will talk a little bit more about that, Jack. And under the leadership of Director Jay Shu, who is here with us today, we're working towards making this bridge larger, as I said. Today, the museum has over 250,000 visitors a year, but we have 10 times more of that number accessing us through our multiple online and digital channels. We serve about 40,000 school children a year, and we're busting through the seams. We are embarking on an ambitious project to expand the museum with an addition of a 12,000 square foot special exhibitions pavilion with a large rooftop outdoor art gallery. And if I may, it is supposed to be larger than SF MoMA. So please make note of that. With this pavilion, we will be able to do many more special exhibitions without any dark periods. And Jack, many more contemporary art exhibitions, which require high ceilings and large contiguous spaces. And we will continue to offer digital interpretive tools that reflect the way that we learn and engage today. And we hope that many of you will help us build this larger bridge in the next few years. Because if you cannot see it, you cannot know it. If you cannot know it, you don't understand it. If you cannot understand it, you cannot love it. And if you cannot feel love or empathy towards other beings, the world is simply not a nice place to live. So with that, I would like to now turn to our distinguished panel so they can share their powerful stories with us. Let me make a very quick introduction of Mr. Dick Blum. Are you awake? He told me he just flew in this morning. Of course, Mr. Blum needs no introduction, but very quickly, he's the chairman of Blum Capital Partners, co-chairman of Newbridge Capital, and as a philanthropist, he is the founder and chairman of the American Himalayan Foundation, which is a humanitarian organization that works in Nepal and throughout the Himalaya to improve education and health and preserve Tibetan culture and prevent girl trafficking. Jack Wadsworth is currently an advisory director of Morgan Stanley and honorary chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia. He has been extremely generous supporter of Asia Society Northern California and is the co-chair, not me, but he is the co-chair of Asia Society. And as I mentioned, a big champion of contemporary art, Asian contemporary art. Bill Draper III, Draper Richard's Kaplan Foundation, has been founded on the belief in the power of innovation and the conviction that with bold support, passionate individuals with great ideas can change the world. By 2021, it will distribute $110 million to grantees. A partner of note in India is the Indus Actions Project, which aims to enroll 1 million disadvantaged students under the Right to Education Section 12 law and extend the implementation of the law to all 29 states in India. So if I could invite the panelists to please join me in front here. So we can, I have a few questions to ask, and maybe, and we will also have a 10-minute or so Q&A session at the very end. But maybe Dick, we will start with you.
Why?
Because you're the only one sitting to the right of me. About maybe the question of what caused you to get into philanthropy, and why Nepal?
Well, I think ones are very influenced by their parents, whether you know it or not. And because I will often ask myself the same question. And my father died when I was quite young, but my mother was old. She didn't have much money, but she was always volunteering to do one thing or another. And a buddy of mine we're still friends. We started kindergarten together as a retired Marine. We had what was known as the Blum and Phelan Magic Show. It was done in the garage in the back of our house. And after 2 brilliant performances, we raised $11. And we went to the out on 19th Avenue. We grew up in San Francisco, to the Shrine Hospital out there. And this was the time when, people, particularly children, were dying of polio. And we went there with our $11 and saw all these kids in iron lungs. A lot of them lived the rest of their lives there. And I just remember how struck we were. And I think even as, 10-year-old kids, it piqued your interest in. Not everybody gets the same opportunities that you do. And in fact, a little advertisement from my book over there, which is called The Price is Right. They're free here. It's called An Accident of Geography, that some of us were born in a time and a place and developed a skill set, and in some cases wind up with more capital than we needed, and we owe it to the rest of the world. And I think it was National Geographic that got me going to the Himalayas. The Dalai Lama and I were 2 weeks different in age, was convinced that I was a Tibetan in my last life. I explained to him it wasn't possible because I can't stand their food, but love the culture otherwise. And I've been going there for 49 years, and you couldn't help but develop a friendship with the Sherpas and the Tibetans, because you just didn't see them in passing. You walked the trails with them, led one Everest expedition in '81, and over a period of years, they all became family. And I think it was Mandela who said that to really understand somebody and what their problems are, you got to get into their skin. And I've been godfather to one Sherpa family for over 40 years. And I talk to them all the time, and even a couple of the kids are over here now. So you understand what their problems are, or at least a lot of them. And that motivates you to do whatever seems to be next. Where with we won't talk about it that much today because it doesn't have that much to do with Asia, but the growing thing that I spend most time with these days is the Blum Center for Developing Economies that started at Berkeley and are at 9 other campuses. And we got kids all over the world doing projects. And the big concern I have right now, it's a little off the subject, but not exactly something you shouldn't be worrying about, is this current administration basically wants to cut the aid budget. How many people think the amount of money from our federal budget is more than 10%? Well, this is a sophisticated crowd. It's actually third of 1%. It's $19 billion, and they want to cut it. And if you go to a place like Nepal, they like Americans. Why do they like Americans? Probably goes back to Kennedy and the Peace Corps. It's climb restrictors. It's guys, things like American Himalayan Foundation. We need to be doing that all over the world, so we can help them grow economically, that we can share similar values where it makes sense, get to know each other, which is everything that, even though you guys can't remember who's chairman of which, but and Diane and I were very instrumental with the with well, before Jay's time, to get the museum going, which I think you can be very proud of today. And Dick Holbrook beat me over the head and said we're starting an Asia Society in the West Coast, and you're a member. So Dick was very good at raising funds for whatever. And even though he's passed away 10 years ago, I feel he's still asking me for more money. But anyway, so I don't look. That's probably a long this answer to the question, but it's there's nothing I enjoy more than doing these kind of things, and where a lot of it is government to government. We found that the best place to really decide how to help people is in the villages. And I always say, don't forget to walk the villages. Villagers tend to be honest, because how do you live in a village if you're not honest? They'll chase you out. And two, many villages are in poor places, and people learn how to survive. If you look at something American Himalayan Foundation does today, and we're involved in all kinds of projects, you say, well, how many of them were your ideas versus theirs? Most of them were their ideas.
Thank you very much for that. Jack, you can talk about anything you want, but I would like you to touch upon a little bit on the art as well. So you have spent a lot of time in East Asia. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience there, and then how that experience has led to what you're doing today.
Akiko, thank you. I am honored to be on a panel with you.
Thank you, co-chairman.
And, it's just, I mean, it's one of those moments that I'm really quite happy about. I also am glad that Susie Wadsworth is not here. I'm pretty sure she's not here. Because it would scare me to death to talk about our philanthropy in front of her. And it's a little bit getting into what you say. Our philanthropy has always been a partnership. And our philosophy from the very beginning was anonymity. So most people don't know what our philanthropy has been. The only place it really shows up is in organizations like the Asia Society, where our support is visible. I think it goes back, like Dick said, to family. And the most influential woman in my life, aside from Susie, was my grandmother, who said, my boy, always tell the truth, because you won't have to remember what you said. When you leave the village, which is Fort Thomas, Kentucky, I think you should probably, unlike Fort Thomas, Kentucky, where we trust everybody until they do something that causes us not to trust them, when you get to New York, you should probably start from the opposite end. And the other thing she said was, be proud but never brag. And to me, that is probably the most poignant, message I could leave anybody with in terms of philanthropy. To me, the best kind of philanthropy is the kind of philanthropy that has a huge benefit to the recipient and no benefit to the giver. There are a lot of philanthropists around, and we know them, who even go to the point to take credit for their corporate philanthropy. That's not good. Don't pay the price, right? Like Akiko, we've always, and Dick, we've always had sort of a focus, and our focus has been education, it's been art, it's been climate change, and more recently, it's been bioscience. Those are the four things that we have focused on. And that brings me to a comment that's not really related to your question, but today I think philanthropy is in kind of a muddle. And the muddle to me is you can be very impactful from the right side of your balance sheet as you can be from the left side of your balance sheet. That is to say, there is investing in for-profit businesses that have a huge impact on society and are therefore, in a way, philanthropic activities if they succeed. It has been for us a journey that started, like I think all four of us, with a wealth-creating moment. I mean, some of us inherited wealth, some of us created it, but in 1986, Morgan Stanley went public. And until March of 1986, this Wadsworth family always had liabilities that exceeded our assets. And therefore, an idea became a reality. We started thinking about how can we make a difference. And one of the things that we did first, I mean, the month after Morgan Stanley went public, we gave a chunk of shares of Morgan Stanley to the Packard Collegiate Institute in Brooklyn, New York, where I was the board chair. I had a number of colleagues that bought houses in Southampton or bought sailboats, but you know, the first thing in our mind was to make a gesture and have an impact on the school where our kids were going to school. As a consequence, the educational aspect of our philanthropy has always really been important. We have a family foundation that we created about that time. It's called the Spencer Foundation, which is my middle name, which is another reason people don't know what we do.
No, we do.
But yeah, you do, right? That's why I'm glad Susie's not here. She would kill me. Yeah, right. We sat down the night we created that foundation and wrote a mission. And the mission said, we want to fund new ideas in education anywhere in the world which foster creativity, innovation, and risk-taking. And in a very important way, that led us into art. And let me just tell a brief story, and then I'll talk about a couple other things. But when we got to Japan, and I was responsible for Morgan Stanley's Asian strategy, obviously the first group of employees we had, since we had one office and one location in 1987, was to hire local college graduates. And the first thing you observe when you bring new graduates out of Japanese schools into an organization like Morgan Stanley, they're very risk averse. And risk aversion in Japan is a function of a whole lot of things. It has to do with the education system. It has to do with, history. But anyway, I was confronted with the question of, okay, how do I really explain and how do I instill in this new group of employees the idea that risk-taking is going to be important? So I started buying contemporary Japanese art. And Susie and I loved it. But more importantly, it enabled me to take a very contemporary, perhaps even unpopular work of contemporary Japanese art, hang it up in the conference room, and bring a group of the young staff into the room and say, if you are worried about taking a risk, first of all, you shouldn't be at Morgan Stanley. But secondly, what you should contemplate is the risk that your countrymen, same age, are taking when they stand in front of a blank canvas in the morning. They got it. I mean, it was, they never liked the art, but they got the point. Most organizations in Japan, frankly, will buy old Japanese art, or they'll buy Western art because it's safe. So we have supported over the years the Guggenheim, the Asia Society, Williams College. We built a studio art building at Williams College, which is called the Spencer Studio Art Building. In fact, my favorites, and the name Spencer comes from the first member of our family who came to this shore. Her name was Charlotte Spencer. And I was a trustee of Williams for a while, and one of the leaders of the Williams community was complaining that we had no buildings at Williams College that were named after women. I said, you do. You just don't know it. right now, I would say, and let me just fast forward, the combination of climate change and education is coming together for me in a project that we're doing at the California College of the Arts. As many of you may know, CCA will be moving its entire campus to San Francisco on 19th Street, closing the Oakland campus. And this is an opportunity because the educational program there is design, it's architecture, it's fine arts, it's business. It is right at the sweet spot of the entrepreneurial, exciting community which defines the Bay Area in a very important way. So we've been through 3 years of planning. We've now hired an architect, and our mission, I should be careful in saying please don't repeat this because it's highly confidential. No. Right. It's not. I mean, our mission is to create a net zero campus based on a microgrid. And we've hired one of the finest architects in America from Chicago, the Studio Gang, to realize that outcome. And to me, this is really about our future. It's about education. It's about climate change. It's about green buildings. And to be able to say to future generations of students at CCA, you will be learning in a place that is a living laboratory that reflects what will have to be done for the future of the world to keep this planet safe. All of what we've been doing all these years, to me, sort of comes together in this one project.
Thank you, Jack. You are truly a jack of all trades. I didn't know that you were involved in so many philanthropic areas. I've known you primarily for your work in the art realm, but thank you so much for sharing these great stories. May I turn to you now?
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I never thought of myself as being very philanthropic. I started my career in East Chicago, Indiana, which is fifth of the world. There's a cement plant and a steel factory, and just not a place you want to go. It was a great way to bring up my wife, however. She has thought everything's been great ever since. I never had much money, so I've always thought of myself as somebody who's trying to make more. And so I started I worked for Inland Steel Company there, but came out here and joined a guy named, I came out here because of my father, who had started the first venture capital company in the West, and he was an investment banker, and he knew about venture capital in New York, the Rockefellers and Whitneys, and a guy named General Dorio up in Boston that taught me at Harvard Business School, who started American Research and Development. And they, anyway, he and Fred Anderson, who had run the 8th Bomber Command, and a couple other, there were 5 young guys, and I was one of them that joined. So that's what got me out here. And I've felt that I've been involved in venture capital ever since. I stayed with that firm about 3 years and then started my own with a guy named Pitch Johnson, some of you know. And I didn't really think about philanthropy until I went to India with a gal named Robin Richards, who we started a firm that was investing, it was venture capital in the developing world. In India, we picked India. We actually went to China and to Indonesia and Vietnam and to figure out which country we'd go to, but we picked India because they spoke English. We didn't have to go there and see all those guys. But when we got back here, we thought, well, we've both been to India and they speak English, and that's where we're going. So we started that, and we made a lot of money on it. Then the idea of philanthropy came in, and I thought, having seen some of the poverty in India and the lack of education, I thought we need to do something about this. So we gave most of the money, we made a lot of money, most of it we gave into a foundation that the two of us started, and we added Rob Kaplan a little while later. He's now with the Fed running the Southwestern operations of the Federal Reserve. But Rob had been teaching at Harvard Business School and had been a vice chairman at Goldman Sachs before that. And the three of us are still on the board of something called Draper, Richards, Kaplan. And the whole program that Robin and I set out to focus on was venture capital for nonprofits. And so we just made a transition that was very easy for us. Picking good people, looking in their eyes, figuring out who will knock through a brick wall in order to get the job done, and it's the same for nonprofit organizations. That leader and the team that leader puts together is so important, and we focus on that more than what it is they want to do, because they all have really good ideas, whether it's for health, education, poverty reduction. And we've had a really good run. We now have done 110 of these organizations that we helped to start up. We tried to do it in their very earliest stage, less than 3 years old by the time we get in there. And we'll only stay with them for 3 years so that we rotate and we keep making our money go further by starting up with more entrepreneurial nonprofits. And we've done 110 of these now, and we are very proud of the record. And it comes back to us, typical of venture capitalists, we take most of the credit, but of course it's really due to the entrepreneur that is dedicating their life to his or her life to the cause that they're after. And it's really great for everybody's satisfaction to be working in a nonprofit area as opposed to just a money-making area. So my life has changed, but rather recently, and I'm glad it has, and I'm glad to be here. I feel a little out of place because I'm really not a big-time philanthropist like you are, Jack. Anyway, great to be here, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I know we could go on for hours talking about all your work, but we have to leave. Jack could. We have to leave some time for the next panel as well, so I think it might be time for us to open it up for questions. If we may have some from the audience, would anybody like to ask a question to our panelists?
So Jack, mine's an art question. Are you supporting Chinese contemporary art also, or just Japanese?
Well, really quick answer. I mean, one of the reasons that we focused on contemporary Japanese and Chinese art when we were in Asia was because we felt studying contemporary art was a good way, to understand the culture and the history of the places we were. The passion for that learning led us to support, I would say principally, both Chinese and Japanese contemporary art, and that led us to support education in that field, collecting in that field, exhibitions. Probably the most notable exhibitions that we have supported have been at the Asian Art Museum and at the Guggenheim and at the Asia Society, but our focus has always been, as Akiko keeps needling me, contemporary art.
Inside Out show?
The Inside Out was one of our first ones, and actually one of the things that makes us really proud about that is the conception of that exhibition was about sending Gao Ming Lu, who was the curator of that show, to China to look for art, and we bought his airplane ticket.
The 110 organizations. What kind of organizations are they that you've been working with and helping start up?
Right. Well, we mentioned we were talking about Nepal. The first, almost, I think it was the first one that we backed was a guy named John Woods, who had an idea. He had been in Nepal, up on a mountain. Found a bunch of kids at school time, and they weren't in school. Where are the schools? Well, the school is on the top of the other mountain. There's no school on this mountain, and they can't get back in time for dinner if they're going to go down the mountain, up the other one, and back down. So he said, I'm going to devote my life to building schools and libraries, which is basically a room full of books. And he started in Nepal, John Woods, and that was called Room to Read. We gave him his first $100,000, $100,000 a year is the way we do it for everybody. It's all the same, $100,000 a year for 3 years, and we stay with them only 3 years, as I said. So, John, by the way, when I first met him, I went to see him. He had this bag on the ground, and I said, well, what's that? Well, that's my sleeping bag. I had to write we often stay up and work all night. I said, hey, we got to back this guy. And she, the gal I was with, said, no, she wanted me to see his business plan. And she was very, wanted to see, it's Robin Richards, wanted me to see the business plan. And so, and he had been up all night writing the business plan. I said, we don't need a business plan. Well, okay, I'll take a look at it. But basically, you got your money. And then, but what they remember is not the $300,000, but the coaching and the help along the way, the mothering, because it's lonely at the top. And a venture capitalist, an entrepreneur, it's a very tough business because they don't have a lot of people to talk to. And so anyway, we have a reputation now for really helping in that other way, the mothering way, and that's one example of he's now built. Just to give you we gave him his first money. He now is on a $50 million a year budget. $50 million a year budget, and some of them are not that successful. I mean, most of them are not that successful, but they all have done some good with the help and the money that we've given. So that's one example. I could give you lots of others, but I won't bore everybody.
Hi, I think it's really wonderful that you guys are giving a lot of money, and I'm just wondering, to what extent have you had any experience involving local populations in the grant decision-making process, and if so, what that's looked like?
Trying to figure out how to think about the question you just asked. With us, most of the ideas, believe it or not, come from government, come from villages, come from wherever. They know what they need. And then what we try to do with the people that bring us the idea is that, okay, maybe it's a good idea. Is this the right person to make it happen? And, it's the venture business. And I mean, I didn't start earlier by saying one of the things that we have done, we were actually the first private equity guys, as far as I know, in Asia. They all thought we were out of our mind, but we believed in a growing middle class in Asia, particularly East Asia, and it's an amazing number. I don't know if $40,000 in China is the criteria for being middle class. Do you have any idea how many people are middle class in China today? 320 million people. So the point I want to make is our strategy towards finding an entrepreneur, running a business, whether it be for profit or non-profit, is pretty much the same. And you tend to start with a team. If they look okay, sometimes the team sticks together forever, but usually they don't. And so we don't like to tell them how to run their businesses, but you need to be involved in enough to know when things are going in the right direction or wrong direction. Now, how do you figure that out? It's just kind of like how you figure out anything else in life. You watch and make a decision.
You know, I would say from our point of view, a high percentage of our philanthropy goes to helping underserved kids in inner cities, and I don't think there's anything much more local than that. And our kids are now taking over the foundation, and they're even more passionate about that idea.
And I think I answered the question.
Thank you all, each of you, for sharing about your philanthropy. You've talked about some of this implicitly, but I'm curious about how each of you think about having the greatest impact in your philanthropic work.
Michael, we're going to need 2 hours for that discussion.
I give you the simple answer. Okay. For us, we started with Sherpas and Tibet refugees and the Dalai Lama. It was years before we understood one of the worst problems in Nepal was trafficking, and we now have 14,000 girls in school saved from being sold. We do a lot of good things, but it's hard to beat that one.
Everything we do, we think about impact. And let me just say about the Asia Society, Mr. Rockefeller's original idea was that Asia would be important. He said that in 1956, and that to understand Asia and to build bridges between Asia and the United States, you will have to understand the culture of Asia. And I would say that is still, you know, whether it's art, education, or business and policy, is still the mission of the Asia Society. And to the extent that we can do anything to improve the relationship between the U.S. and Asia, and particularly China, that's impact. That's up to Trump.
Yeah, I think impact is really an interesting question. And when an entrepreneur comes in, a social entrepreneur comes into our office and starts the pitch to, we immediately jumped in, what's the impact going to be? And sometimes the impact can be gigantic in a local situation, in a village, and other times a really competent person can spread that impact around. It may not be as heavy in any one area, but in any one location, but it can be very impactful in reaching a lot of people. And that's, we've found people working in India, of course, you know, on the education problem. It's basically a lack of money that comes from the government. Doesn't have much money, and most of it is corruptly managed. And that's their biggest problem, is high school and lower education. And there's a very, you know, it's very hard to have much of an impact on that problem. And there are several that we've backed, several entrepreneurs that we've backed trying to work on that. But it's still important because there's so many people involved in India and with this problem. So that's be my answer to that you have to look and recognize that there are both kinds. There's kind of a very on top of it, very big impact in a local situation. And once in a while you hit a good program that has impact all over the world. Room to Read is one example.
First of all, thank you guys for taking the time to speak today. I really appreciate it. It's very interesting. I was curious, since all of you have such successful business careers, whether there were any particular lessons or skills that you had acquired in that phase of your life that you found especially useful now that you've moved towards more of a philanthropic focus.
I would say only back winners. Don't back any losers. And that's what we do. I wish I'd known that.
I would say picking good people is the key, and for me, it's always been the interview with Susie that tipped the scale.
Thank you all, and if the second panel can come on up now.
Okay, I want to make sure that I have the program right. So I think Dr. Carson, are you going to give a mini keynote? That's what I see in my notes.
I'm happy to hear some remarks.
Okay, so you don't need to stand at the podium. I think you want to just walk around a bit.
Yeah. So I can, talk to the folk on the other side of the room as well. And I may peek at a few notes, but I've been asked to...
Oh, actually, one second, Dr. Carson. One thing I'll do is I thought someone else was going to introduce you guys, so let me just give you a brief bio.
All right.
Before we get started. So actually, I'll just maybe I'll just take a minute to introduce myself. If that's okay. It's a little fun. It's different on the notes that I have here. Thank you all for being here, and I want to try to save as much time for the Q&A. I'm Karthik Ramakrishnan. I'm the Associate Dean of the School of Public Policy, UC Riverside. A couple of different hats here that I'm going to try to bring to the conversation. I'm the chair of the California Commission on APIA Affairs. If you don't know the commission, I'd love to talk to you about it afterwards. I'd love to get more people involved in the work of the commission, especially as we try to build the leadership profile and the civic engagement of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in California. Also in the early stages of starting a Center for Social Innovation, so it's exciting to be here to have a conversation, especially with this panel, about new directions in philanthropy and what we all should be thinking about. Biographically, I'll say I'm an immigrant. I lived in India till I was 10, moved to Canada and then to the US. And thinking, and one of the themes I just was talking with Dr. Carson a little bit before, I was surprised to find that a lot of the work of the foundation involves work not just in Silicon Valley, but also in Asia. So a lot of different, I think we're going to have a very exciting set of conversations here. And with that, let me just introduce our two panelists. Dr. Emmett Carson is the founding CEO of Silicon Valley Community Foundation. An international thought leader in the field of philanthropy, in 2006, he led the unprecedented merger of two community foundations, creating the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Emmett Carson has published more than 100 works on philanthropy and is an authority on issues of social justice, public accountability, and African American giving. We also are lucky to have Tim Draper join us. In 1994, he created a nonprofit for young children to learn about business and entrepreneurship called BizWorld. In 2011, he created Draper University of Heroes, a residential and online school to help extraordinary young people meet their entrepreneurial goals. So first of all, let's give a warm welcome to our panelists. And then we'll proceed with remarks by Dr. Carson.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that introduction. I want to thank Ken and Eve at the Asia Society for all their help. I want to thank the awardees tonight for all of their efforts. Congratulations, and well earned and well deserved. I've been asked to talk a little bit about trends in philanthropy, and I'm going to make a lot of generalizations, right? Because trends don't apply to everyone. But I do think that we are at the cusp of a new renaissance in American philanthropy. And I think there are some very distinct trends between what I'm going to call traditional approaches to philanthropy and new approaches to philanthropy. I don't mean to imply or suggest that the traditional is wrong or that the new is right, only to suggest that they're very, very different and have very different implications for funding organizations and how organizations will need to respond. Okay, are you with me so far? Okay, so Silicon Valley Community Foundation is a fact sheet on the side. Today, we're the largest community foundation in the world. We have $8.2 billion in assets under management. We work with over 2,000 donor families, over 125 corporations. Last year, we distributed $1.3 billion in grants to 69 countries. So we do philanthropy. All right. And we work with a lot of the newer donors. But in my past life, I worked at the Ford Foundation and was responsible for their global philanthropy and their U.S. philanthropic work, working with other foundations, infrastructure groups like the Council on Foundations and Independent Sector. And I left there and I spent 13 years as CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation. So I say that to say I think I'm in a good position to talk about what the traditionalists do, and for the last 10 years here, what the new folk are doing. And I want to quickly go through 7 trends or so to give you a format. So the first thing is that the new philanthropists are what I call master learners. Master learners. They go deep into a subject. They're not cursory. You heard some of that from the great earlier panel. They go deep and they learn about the work that they want to engage in. And that's different from the traditional philanthropists who said, you know, hey, good person, give you money, come back in a year, send me the annual report, and we'll think about it some more, right? But these new philanthropists, they go deep. And in going deep, they want a lot of engagement because they're active in the area, and that I'll come back to that later. Second point around these newer philanthropists is that they tend to have a smaller number of issues that they focused on. So, right, it's only 2 or 3. You heard that in the panel again. They've got 2 or 3 things. They really focus on those 2 or 3 things. The older philanthropists, they'd have 20 organizations that they give to, right? Really broad, really diffuse. They'd have their list. They come in once a year. Boom, 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 boom. They might change the amounts a little bit, but very static list overall, broad numbers. The new trend, smaller number so that they can go deep, right? Third trend, they tend to go big, right? The old philanthropists, traditional philanthropists, very incremental. We'll only give you this much. Let's see what you do with that. See if you can get some other people. Show me a little something. Next year we'll talk again. I'll go a little bit further, right? The newer trend is, you know, I want to go big or go home. I'm going to get table stakes. I believe in this. I've learned about you. Let's see what you can do. That leads to the next trend. They want to learn something for what they invested in. They're really outcome-oriented, metrics-oriented. I want to know that I learned something. That learning may be a negative learning, right? Maybe this doesn't work, or it doesn't work doing it that way, but they want to learn something out of it. The traditional philanthropist philanthropists, they want to learn something, but it's also a feel-good piece to them. And that's not the diminished feeling good, but it is that the feel-good came first. It's the right thing to do. I feel good about the work. The metrics sort of followed. In this case, I may or may not feel good. It's really important that you show me what you learned for my really big investment, right? So big, outcome, incremental. I can say I want to feel good, right? I love the Girl Scouts. I love Girl Scout cookies. But I'm not looking for a lot of impact when I buy my cookies. I want to feel good. You see my point. It's a de minimis amount. Now, let me keep on track with my other outcomes. My memory isn't as good as it used to be. So the new philanthropists are also, they understand there are different ways to do good, right? The traditional philanthropist with a foundation, there's really one way to do good. There's a nonprofit, it has a 501c3 status, and I give it money. I might also be able to give it some coaching, or I think the phrase was mothering that was used. I can do some of that, but the basic way is I give you money. But increasingly, the new philanthropists think about there are a lot of ways to do good, and the panel mentioned you might want to start a public benefit company, a LC3. There are other ways to engage in having a good outcome. A foundation as a structure is very limited in its way to do good. And so you see a lot of people thinking about LC3s and other kinds of LLCs to do their philanthropy because the range of things that they can invest in to do good are different. The most common example of a company doing good, and this is not a commercial, but, you know, Toms. You buy a pair of Toms shoes, they give a pair away. There's another company that does the same thing with eyeglasses, right? They're doing good, but they've got a business model to support that good. Newer philanthropists, younger philanthropists are more open to other ways to get good done in addition to just making a grant. All right, you with me so far? I got two more, I think. So, libertarian values. The new philanthropists tend to have libertarian values. The old model basically said my exit strategy, to put it in venture capitalist terms, my exit strategy is that government is going to come in once I've shown that this thing works, and they will take it over and fund it. And now I get to go take my investment capital someplace else and try and find another idea for government to take over. Well, these new philanthropists are sort of ambiguous about government. And it makes sense when you step back to think about it. Many of them are in the tech space, and they are seeing government to be slow to change. They see government as a barrier. They see government getting fixed on one way of doing things, even when it's right at the start. But then as time moves on, the regulations, the process don't evolve enough to keep up. So they're ambivalent about saying, I want government to take over. And yet when it comes to social values, they tend to be very progressive. If it's not hurting somebody else, have a party, right? That's pretty much where they are. That's influencing their philanthropy in profoundly different ways than traditional philanthropists who had a mindset government is going to at some point take this over. And then the last piece I wanted to touch on is that they want to do good now, right? So there's this whole trend increasingly of people who are wealthy who are saying, I want to do it today. I want to do it in my lifetime. I'm not looking to create an institution that will last in perpetuity that will figure it out with people that may not have my appetite for risk, may not have my appetite for going big. I want to do it now, have the fun, be engaged, and that also has very profound institutions. So I would caution you, when you make that comparison, you can't compare the individual philanthropists that we saw on the earlier panel and that who may come to mind with institutions like the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller. you've got to compare those individuals to Rockefeller, to Ford, to Carnegie, to Kellogg, not the institutions, the people. Because the people, if you look at the individuals, they're very similar in what they did in their time and how they acted and how these individuals in their time act. But if you compare the individual donor to how the institutions created by the donor, that's a false comparison. So there are a lot of other trends that I could point out and differences and implications, but I hope I've given you just a surface understanding of some really big differences and some implications. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to kind of mix up different kinds of formats, I think, in the course of this conversation. So next we have Tim Draper, and I have some prepared questions, but I'm just going to kind of just leave it open to just some initial thoughts you want to share with us.
Sure. Yeah, that was great, Dr. Carson. That was, yeah. I've never really thought of that third part where you were talking about the government. I was thinking it's one of those things that's been sitting in the back of my mind. I do understand that it used to be we thought, oh, the government will take care of it, and now the government is incarcerating, 4 times as many people, and they're doing a horrible job on educating, and they're doing all these things. And so the new philanthropists are saying, no, we got to go fix this. And so it's sort of a desperate situation, and they're saying, and I got to fix it now because, my kid's in school or whatever it is. Just a little bit about, Dad mentioned that venture capital is where we started, our family started. And I have made it my mission, watching what has happened with Dad and how he's kind of had an impact on the Silicon Valley and how it's grown and built. And it started as a bunch of prune trees and apricot growth, and it grew into this extraordinary center of optimism and industry. It made me feel like, well, that's the thing that seems to really make things happen. And so my mission in life has been to spread venture capital and entrepreneurship around the world. And so I have, and I've never thought in terms of being a philanthropist. I've just thought in terms of this is a mission. And I will get there through for-profits, nonprofits, whatever works. And so, much the way Jack was talking about how, some of the best things that have happened are through the for-profit world. I got this award for being a green philanthropist, and it really was an award because we backed Hotmail. Because you no longer have to, rip down some trees and turn it into pulp and make it into paper and then lick poison and send it to use greenhouse gases to fly the thing to another place. Now it's just a couple of electrons flying through the air, and we are all communicating. And it was like this amazing breakthrough for me where I thought, oh my gosh, the world's going to open up. Silicon Valley sort of had a monopoly there for a while, and then I thought, whoa, when Hotmail happened, all the geographic borders are going to fall, all the businesses are going to open up, we're all going to be able to communicate with each other and do business, and things are really going to pick up. And so I thought, whoa, this is a great opportunity. Why don't I go set up venture funds all over the place? And I did, and it's been a great mission for me. But then there were these other things that were happening that I didn't think were right, and it was interesting. George Schultz came to me and he said these school vouchers are a good idea, and he takes you through in a very nice, clear-cut way how this is going to improve everyone's education. And I watched as he did this school voucher initiative, and it went down. And I thought, how can they not see this? It's because they weren't listening to him when I got a chance to listen to him. what he was saying was, if you can create a good marketplace, everyone's accountable, everybody competes, everybody ends up with a better education. So I started BizWorld just to show the world, hey, this is how business works. I think then you will probably vote the right way the next time you do the school vouchers come up. Now, my daughter gets full credit for BizWorld, though, because she said, she's 9 years old, and she was supposed to be on this panel. And I'm going to say a few words for her in a bit, so you can go to the next generation down. She said, what do you do? Where do you go? You know, mom's here. In our case, mom was here. You're gone. What are you doing? And it was a very bright 9-year-old who would come up with a question. And I thought, venture capital, my gosh, how do I tell venture capital, a 9-year-old, about how this all works? And I thought, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to go into your classroom, and we're going to create you like making friendship bracelets, so we're going to make a friendship bracelet industry in your classroom. So it took me a long time, but I finally convinced the public school teacher to allow me to have 4 mornings, and where I could do this design day and manufacturing day and market day and finance day. And all the way along, they keep track of their money, and there was this one guy who's standing on the desk going, "Get your friendship bracelets here!" Da, 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 da. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this guy is fantastic, and things are really amazing. And
have you followed him since?
Actually, no. This is one of those things that may make you kind of sad, which was one of the administrators comes in and says, Johnny has to go now. And I said, well, why? My God, he's my best student. Well, he's been determined to be ADD, and so we're gonna go give him, Ritalin and to give him culture counseling. And I'm going, no, he's an entrepreneur. Keep this kid. But it gave me sort of a window on education and on go in and teach a class. It's one of the great things you'll ever do. And you can use BizWorld. Go in, say, we've got this thing, and we can go. It's a great thing to do. Anyway, it got me going on education. And then I brought this up to Pete Wilson at a fundraiser, and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, what do you mean? I said, what are you going to do about it? And eventually he appointed me to the State Board of Education. And I started to see some awful things, mostly driven by, union control, but a lot just driven by the system. The system it's ugly. It's the textbook manufacturers, there's only one. And so when they negotiate with the Department of Education, they're just going, okay, well, it's going to be used, so what's the price? And that's the deal, and you're stuck with a monopoly provider. Same thing with the Department of Education. There's only one of them, so it's not like the districts can go to multiple choices. They're stuck with whatever that department says. And then we were on the state board, and we were somehow telling the people in Petaluma that they couldn't use their milk money to build a gym. And I don't know if you guys have ever been to Petaluma, but it's full of cows. So you start thinking that there are some major changes that have to happen in education. So I got very active in education. And I worked on the second school voucher initiative, and it polled at 72% in favor. And then once the teachers union spent their $100 million and got everybody on a phone, it went down. We ended up losing. We only got 30% of the vote. And then I thought, okay, you can't do it that way. So maybe what we do is we lead by example, and that was what got me to start Draper University of Heroes. which was I kind of looked around and I thought, God, school is getting into these boxes. You're stuck in the classroom. You have to do exactly the same thing. They standardize everything. They don't allow for any. It's as though progress never happened in education. While meanwhile, everything is better here in the Silicon Valley. The compute power doubles every 18 months. The food's better. The transportation is a lot better. So many things have really improved, but schooling, flatline. If you're lucky, it's flatline. So I thought, well, okay, I can't do it. This political thing looked like I walked into the fun house. So instead, I decided that I would try to lead by example. And with Draper University of Heroes, we're trying to create heroes. And we've innovated in a lot of different ways. And we started by looking at all the things that we would have had to do to be accredited, and we've done just the opposite. So you have to have a history department with tenured professors. We only teach future, and we only have, and no one can speak for more than an hour at Draper University, except maybe I can, but and then we do a couple of other things. We bring in, there's this wonderful guy who's a Nobel Prize winner for dark matter. And he comes in and he talks about dark matter and all of the great things, looking into the cosmos. We're all staring up at the stars and whatever. And he talks about how they invented dark matter. And then we have somebody come in the next day who says dark matter is complete bunk. Einstein was right, Niels Bohr was wrong back 90 years ago, and our science has all gone this particle physics route, and it should have gone the ether route, and that's why they have to come up with stuff like dark matter to make up for the problem. And so what we're trying to do is just blow their minds, and then sort of strip away all their high school hang-ups and get them out there so that they can stand alone and create something extraordinary, because I believe that it's those entrepreneurs that have made all these individual incremental changes that we really have to honor. Your husband. And so I've spent my whole life doing that. So thanks. Sorry, I took a long time.
No, not at all. No, this is good to kind of get a kind of more kind of robust kind of putting it out there. But I'm going to move into a little bit of a speed round to ask some questions, and then we'll go to the audience and then maybe come back. One of the things, it's actually not one of the questions that was kind of circulated in advance, but I'm thinking about this most recent election, and especially in parts of the Midwest where prosperity does not seem to have taken hold, and even parts of California, even in Silicon Valley, there are parts where prosperity has not taken hold. What can Silicon Valley do, right, both among entrepreneurs but also among philanthropists, to make sure that, and I don't think Richard Blum is here, but in terms of inequality and kind of the major problems that can happen when you have such stark inequality, which seems to be getting worse by the year, what can philanthropy and entrepreneurship do about that?
I sort of feel like you want some big inequality because that means you've created wealth in your society. When you try to flatten it, you end up focusing too much on the downside, and the society fails. China has grown hugely because of Deng Xiaoping saying a few of us will get rich first. I think wealth creation is where you really benefit a society, because then the wealthy can then do whatever they do to improve society. That said, there is huge unemployment, and I believe that it is there. Whenever you start seeing some industry to blame, look back at the bureaucrats, because like they blame the banks for the failures that were occurring because of the big crash, but it was the bureaucrats who said, or the politician bureaucrats, that said, you have to lend to these people and you have to put that money to work and we'll guarantee it. So the banks are going, sure, we'll guarantee it. We'll put it, I mean, you guys guarantee it, we'll put that money out. And then when they've got to pay the piper, the bureaucrats are going, those banks, they lent the money. So right now they're saying there's huge unemployment. They're going, those technology companies. And they're sort of blaming technology for this. Now, it is true that robots and self-driving cars and all of these things are going to force people to find new careers, to find new jobs. People say, well, all these people are driving cars, so what's going to happen to them? Well, ask them. When you're in the car with an Uber driver, ask them what's going to happen. They say, oh, well, I've got a consulting gig here, or I'm a musician, or I've got this other thing. So generally, people will find other great things, higher uses for themselves. But I am kind of enamored by this new idea of guaranteed basic income or universal basic income insurance. So what it says is you get 5 years. You're a member of our society. You get 5 years. You can take them early. You can take them late. You get 5 years where you're absolutely guaranteed the minimum income. Some people will take it, some people won't. And that can be implemented through the blockchain. It doesn't have to be like some bureaucrat who can put up a barrier which creates more graft and problems. This can be just done through the blockchain where you get 5 years. And I think you give everybody 5 years, then we're all on the same, we've all got the same deal. And I think having the same deal with the government having, like saying, oh, well, you, because, you wear that kind of shoe, you get this special thing, or me, because I wear this belt, or I'm this type of hairstyle, or whatever, I get something different. I kind of like the idea that when you're dealing with 300 million people, or 1 billion people, or whatever, and you're trying to make a decision for them, it should just go straight across the board.
Okay. Is there a Dr. Carson?
Well, that was
the other
a lot.
Dr. Carson.
And I've got a decidedly different view of how America works. I believe in government. I don't like government all the time. Government doesn't make the right decisions or the right choices. We can reform it. But if you give me 3 variables, if you tell me your race, if you tell me your zip code, and if you tell me your parents' income, I can tell you what your opportunities are going to be. And that's not due to government. Not due to government. And those studies have been replicated by multiple people at multiple universities. If I know your race, your zip code, and your parents' income, I can determine your opportunities. It is not the same for everybody. Just not. Just not. Nowhere near the same for everybody.
So do you think the government is doing a good job at that?
I think we get the government we deserve. But
okay,
I listen to you, so I want you to listen to me. Because
I didn't realize it was going to get so exciting.
Philanthropy cannot be government. Philanthropy is not going to put 24 million people back on health care. Philanthropy can't do that. Philanthropy is not going to rebuild the roads and bridges. Philanthropy can't do that. There's only one entity that can do that. That's government. Now, if we don't like government, then we need to fix government. But the idea that philanthropy, which is a minuscule part of the federal government, if you took all the assets of philanthropy, you could probably fund the discretionary part of the U.S. budget for about half a year. That's how much philanthropy is. Half a year. So when we say, okay, do I like it? Is it all right? Every business doesn't work effectively. Every business doesn't provide equal outcomes and good data. So we hold government to a standard that no entity can live with. But to say that somehow government is causing inequality, there are other factors in our society that are causing tremendous inequality, right? And one of the best advents has been police body cams and dash cams to show everyone how the world is different for some people when they get stopped. It's just different, right? And so we have to start off, what kind of society, how do we get equal opportunity, not equal outcomes? I don't think the problem is that some people do really well. They're not the villains, the people who do really well. The problem is that too many people never get a chance to try to do really well. One last point. Almost 60% of kids in third grade in San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties do not read proficiently at third grade. That's right here. That's not where I grew up in inner city Chicago. That's not New York. That's right here in the tech capital, the epicenter of the tech world, right here. If we don't change that, right, and there are a lot of reasons for that. There's family background for that. There are poor schools for that. A lot of crazy stuff. But if we don't fix it, the anger that right now is built up because we think the inequality is due to the Mexican border, or we think the inequality is due to NAFTA, or we think the inequality is due to trade with China or India, they will come around to say the inequality is due because of you folk in Silicon Valley. And the backlash will be terrible. We agree on that. But we have to start to say where the real problems are and to use our influence, business influence, philanthropic influence, to call the question for what it is and demand change, and not let these false narratives of blame distract people because they're only a temporary distraction.
Okay, I'm going to go to a different question.
So I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. We don't have equality, and and you're saying, but we love government. I'm looking and I'm saying our government is not making that better.
Okay, so we'll
it's failing. It's failing at us. I know.
Okay, wait.
Except that now it has.
All right. I want to move on to a different question. We have minutes and not hours here. Okay. So so maybe I should sit in the middle here. So the next question I have is thinking about, so looking at the room here, right? And so one of the things, as someone who's a Gen Xer, with two kids that are, well, one of them's in third grade. I guess they're Generation Z and not millennials anymore. So thinking about new generations and also thinking about immigrants and especially Asian Americans. One of the new areas of research that I'm embarking on is to look at the problem of low civic engagement among Asian Americans. When we looked at the immigrant population, some of that made sense. Most people got their college degrees, some cases even postgraduate degrees in Asia, not socialized into the US political system or civic life. But what we're seeing now is that the children of those immigrants are under-participating. And it's not just voting, it's all sorts of other types of volunteerism, other civic activities. And some of that concerns me, especially in a state like California. If you look to the future of California, and especially its upwardly mobile, high-income professionals, Asian Americans are overrepresented already, and they will be in the future. But they're not participating. They are not part of the kind of philanthropic experiences that we heard so powerfully in the first panel. What are we going to do? What can we do to turn that around?
That's a good question. Do you think that philanthropy is kind of a club that the Asian Americans feel uncomfortable coming into? Or do you think the Asian Americans have come to America with bright eyes and, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm going to start something and I'm going to build it and I'm going to do great things for society through my business, and that's the great thing I bring.
I mean, I'll give some of my early kind of perspectives from research, and I'd love to hear from the audience, given who we have in the audience as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One, when we say Asians, we're lumping a lot of people together. So we should just acknowledge that that's a generalization. The Asian community broadly has very deep and long philanthropic traditions. So they aren't trying to be a part of any club. They come with their own club. I think the newer generation are becoming Americans along the same trajectory that Irish became Americans, right? And that might be a little provocative, but I haven't started yet. Right, the Irish came, the first generation of Irish, you had all the, going back to Chicago, all the Irish clubs and the groups and really strong, and as they had successive generations, those kids became less Irish and more American. Okay, and I think that is and Americans in general don't have a high level of civic engagement, right? So they're looking more and more like America. The melting pot, if you like it or don't, are melting. Other groups of color don't melt as easily into the pot, and therefore they retain more of their ethnic identity in terms of how they see the world and how the world reacts to them. Right? And so when you break into different Asian groups, then that's probably truer for a lot of Chinese Americans that I see in terms of their philosophy, where if you talk to the parents who were the first generation, and some people may be in here, they say, boy, I can't get my kids to learn the language. I can't get my kids to read, to go to the museums, to do things. Those things gave me a lot of pride, and they're just not interested in it. And as they have kids, they're even less interested in it, to the point where you have to force them to do things. And right, and it's that tension of the old country of both giving back in remittances and traveling back. And as those ties get further and further away, they do less and less. But for African Americans, for people of Latino heritage, the American culture forces a homogeneity of the group that forces them to have to continue to band together within that racial identity, because they see themselves as under assault with that racial identity. And that's less true for some Asian communities.
So, but I'll provide a slightly different perspective on that, because one of the, especially East Asians, there's this frame of the perpetual foreigner, right? San Francisco, you've had 5th, 6th generation Americans here, but when they're walking down the street, we'll get yelled things. Now, of course, the life of an Asian American who's 5th or 6th generation, on average, tends to be much better than an African American or
and I'm not buying into the model minority.
Right.
So I'll be clear.
No, of course. But there is, so the research that I've done, I used to work at the Public Policy Institute of California. We looked at civic organizations at a very local level, things like Chambers of Commerce, Rotary Club. But I would guess, this is something I'd heard, I would bet that in the Asian society, you have more older whites who are part of the kind of reliable philanthropists than either Asian immigrants or Asian Americans, right, born here. If I was on the board of the Asian Society, I would worry about that. Because if you look at future generations of who the high net worth individuals are going to be, they're more likely to be Asian American. And if there's no strategy to engage with those populations, that's going to be a problem for the Asian Society. That's going to be a problem for the Asian Art Museum and other things. So it's more about throwing a question out there. I think we're in the very early stages of trying to figure out what the answers are.
I love that, we're at the Asia Society, but I also feel that the Asians have made huge changes to our world, and so many amazing entrepreneurial agents that have created amazing things. They're doing great things, and I believe doing great things is philanthropy. If they are not necessarily giving their money away, I think eventually they'll realize that you know, when you pay your taxes, you can actually pay more and give more of it away. And I think they're going to start seeing that and say, oh, well, this is better. I can actually give it away to a better place than maybe the government.
Okay. All right. Okay. I detect a regression here. So let's open it up to the audience. So we have mics that are floating around. Just say who you are and whatever affiliation you want to declare, and let's get some questions in here. Back there.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dilworth, and I'm here representing the Foundation Center. And I'm just interested in hearing, we're talking about backyard, and we're also talking global. And I'm interested in that, the balance between helping local and helping global, and your philosophy behind that.
Go ahead.
Oh. People get to choose, right? I think increasingly as as globalization occurs, people have experiences across the country and all around the world. I was raised in Chicago. I went to college at Morehouse in Atlanta. I went to Princeton in New Jersey. I've worked in Washington, D.C. All those places, if you were to look at my philanthropy, there's a trail. My daughter spent a year in China, right? There's a trail. So just because I'm here now, the idea that my philanthropy is going to be here, my scholarships at my high school are in Chicago because I went to the high school in Chicago. I didn't go to a high school here. So as people have more and more of those experiences, local groups are going to have to make the case about outcomes, effectiveness, innovation. Look, you don't choose the restaurant because it's the closest. You don't choose the cleaners because it was the closest. When you do your one click on Amazon Prime, you're not looking for where it was made. You're looking for the cost and the style. Philanthropy is going to be more and more like that because we are all more and more like that. And so philanthropy reflects who we are and where we're going as a society. That's not to say that local won't get supported, but you got to fight for it. You got to make the case for it. But if your argument, I'm a fundraiser, it's part of what I have to do, and I think we're pretty good at it. Last year we raised over $1 billion. I never lead with create a fund with us because we're local or we're near you. Create a fund with us because I can help you get done what you'd like to see in our community or the world. That's what I lead with. But not I'm here so you should give it to me. Now that's a different mindset if you've had for decades an organization set up around we got it because we were the hometown, right? But there's free agency in sports, and so I go with the player now, right?
Tim?
Actually, it's not going to really answer your question because as a venture capitalist, I'm always thinking, yeah, the company has to start locally, and then if it does a really good job, it can start spreading, and then it goes globally. But I was just reminded that my daughter was not on the panel, but this is what she would say. She is only backing women. She decided that is her thing, and she is only backing women. So that's like focused locally in her mind. And she's based in LA, and so she's kind of saying, I'm gonna create this whole. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. I saw how it happened. I'm gonna create the exact same thing here. And it's going to spread here, and mostly amongst women entrepreneurs. So it's that local global thing is a little tricky in my mind. It's a little hard to sort of say, oh, I'm going to do this for the community, and I'm not going to spread it to other communities, which also may need whatever it is that you're providing.
Another question?
Hi, my name is Greer Montgomery. I'm in the Master's in Museum Studies at USF. I wanted to ask a question about impact. Dr. Carson, I know you mentioned that concrete metrics are important in new philanthropy, and that certainly works for stuff like talking about more girls in schools. How do you articulate less tangible forms of impact, like diversity and things like that, in a meaningful way?
It's for some areas it's tough, right? So I'd say there are two dimensions. One dimension is you've got to find in general donors that are equally yoked to what you're trying to do. I find some nonprofits want to go after a billionaire donor and they've got 15 people in the after school program. Right? It's not, so you got to have a rod and a reel, my dad used to say, and think about the fish that you're going after. And you got to be lined up. The second piece then is you have to articulate why you have value. And it may not be a countable thing, but is it esteem? Is it, right, artists in the eye? But you've got to say, we are filling some niche. This is how we define the niche. And this is how you can track if we're growing. So is audience attendance going up, right? Reviews in the art journals, right? But you've got to find some way to articulate that what we do has meaning and that we're better than other people that might be in the space. And as you do that, then for donors who are equally yoked to that, they will see that as the metric and the value proposition.
I would defer to my dad on that impact thing because what they've done is they're focused on sustainability. I think if you figure out something that becomes sustainable, you have found a customer. You found a group that is saying, this is a good thing, let's keep this thing going. So give them the 3 years and then see how they do, I think is a good way to think about how philanthropy becomes impactful. The impact spreads over time if it's really something great, and let the ones that aren't, they may sound good, but let them die if they're not doing anything that's making a big impact on somebody. I always think of the $1 million goes to some group that then goes to some place in Congo, drills a well for one family, and comes back feeling great about themselves when you could spread a lot of smartphones around and Google can tell them all exactly how to drill that well, and they can drill a well.
Let me just add, philanthropy is intensely personal, and only I get to say whether or not I'm throwing away my money. Only I get to say it. You can have an opinion about it, but it was my money. And if I believe in that, I'm the only one that has to believe that it was worthwhile. Right? And that's what I mean about finding your donor. Right? I can look at it by somebody else's criteria. That was a crazy grant to do. Made no sense in the world. And yet, do you know what's special about a bumblebee? We can't tell you why it can fly. It's supposed to be too top heavy to fly. And yet it flies. So I don't listen to what other people tell me I should do with my philanthropy. I figure out that's my bumblebee and will it fly?
Okay. The only caveat I would say is, given the tax rules, and that was in the news today, right, in terms of the kinds of activities that can happen for nonprofits that have tax-exempt status, there's a kind of public interest at stake too, right? It's your money, but it's governed by the tax rules as well.
I make gifts all the time, and I don't itemize them. So again, we shouldn't be blanket. It's a nuanced discussion, right?
Okay.
Nuanced discussion.
So finally, I want to end with just some thoughts of inspiration or encouragement you would give to the next generation that might not yet have gotten into philanthropy in any significant way. What thoughts or words would you have?
Oh, that's easy for me. Look, we are living in a uniquely special time. I'm just going to talk about our local community. It's estimated that in the San Francisco Bay Area, there are 56 billionaires. Think about that. 56 billionaires in the San Francisco Bay Area. There in San Jose alone, 238,000 millionaires. If you've got an idea and there are people who are prepared to go deep and go big, there has never been a better time to try to figure out your idea and get to people who want to give it all away now. That's an incredible opportunity for good ideas, effective ideas, ideas that make sense. This is your time, and we need it now more than ever. Because I certainly know the things that government is doing right now won't help us. That's fairly clear to me. Right? right now.
We've come full circle. This is
and we're only a tweet away from going downhill further. So we need those ideas more than ever before. And there are people of wealth and means who have dedicated to giving it away. And that's a unique opportunity.
Good. I would agree with that completely. And I also think do the things that you think are good and be willing to like stand out and be a little different from your neighbor or your friend or whatever. If they feel, don't let the people around you force you into a way of thinking. I would just generally say start, make sure you're thinking for yourself and be willing to stand out there. I mean, if you are going to make a big impact like that, there are going to be a lot of forces against you, but if you know this is the right thing to do, you stick with it. Yeah.
Well, and that reminds me of what Jack said about risk-taking, right? And then really kind of that tool of using contemporary art as a way to get people to think more about taking risk and just knowing not just the population in Asia, but also Asian Americans. Even though Silicon Valley has a lot of encouragement for risk, among Asian Americans, especially working within corporations, there's more of a risk aversion. And I think thinking not just about philanthropy, but even career choices that we make, how we can encourage more risk-taking to be able to not just achieve more, but be more true to ourselves, right, and to follow our passions. Thank you, everyone, for your engagement here, and we'll go back to Asia Society.
Hi, I'm Bruce Pickering. I'm the Executive Director of this Office of the Asia Society, and I'd like to thank all of our panelists who have given you a really, I think, insightful look at the future and present of philanthropy. We're asked to clear the room, so you can't continue the conversation. The great thing about this place is the food's free and the drinks are free, so they're next door. You can go into the kitchen. It's a big area and continue to chat, but I hope to see most of you at dinner tonight, so thank you for coming.